you know what you're doing when you sit down to write, whether it's going to be an adult story or a children's story. I mean, you know, it's not like, oh, today is this going to be, am I going to write a children's story? Like, I know. I mean, I'm very deliberate and intentional in terms of what project I'm working on. And, you know, when I'm not writing something creative, I find the other kind of work really hard. So it's like there's always a project. The trouble for me has been focus, especially since I've been moving in the last, I'd say, 5 years. So it's really important for me to say, if I'm going to work on an adult thing, that I can show you in there, I have envelopes. So I've got an envelope for this project, I've got an envelope for this project, I've got an envelope for this project. And when I'm working, and I know what I'm working on, that stuff goes, and it's very focused on what I'm going to work on. I have a writer friend who writes for adults, teens, and young children as well, and he has different desks in his house. And he goes, I go to that desk, I'm writing for children. I go to that desk, I'm writing for teens. I go to that desk, I'm writing for adults. I'm thinking, well, I could do that here. This house is big enough, but I don't want to do that. So that, and just in terms of writing process. But in terms of guidelines, I can tell you, for me, when I'm writing for young children, and I do have a theory about this that will just bore you, but it's very academic, actually. The theory. So I believe that the oral tradition of children's literature is about community, and it is about sharing, and it is about the musicality of words. And so I write for the ear, absolutely, almost as much as I do for whether Mabel Merple gets a purple parrot or something. You know, it's like, so I'm writing for the ear for children more than any other. Okay, so the lip slipperiness that we talked about before, that's very intentional. So I am writing because I know that this story is not going to be read by a baby. It's not going to be read by a 2-year-old. It's going to come through an intermediary. Okay, so this is a part of a triangle. And actually, there's a student in Vermont who took my thesis and has used it as a cornerstone of her PhD thesis, and she called it the vibrant triangle. And I've always loved that she took my thesis and did that. So she talks about this vibrant triangle between, you know, the writer, the intermediary, you know, parent or librarian or whatever, and then the child who receives it. Because they are hearing it through another person. Okay, and they're usually hearing it through the human voice. Knowing that, I mean, it's just, you know, very rare the 2-year-old that can pick up a book and read the words. But so knowing that, when I'm writing for children, I'm thinking it is my responsibility, above all else, to make sure those words do not thunk on the page. So everything I possibly can do to make that, and it's not. It's hard. It's still hard to me because we can get lazy with reading rhythm and cadence and all that stuff. And like I said, I think there's time for, like, I am small. I cannot reach the light switch, the juice glasses in the kitchen cupboard, the taps to turn on water. That's a slow, gentle rhythm, but it's every word and every sentence and every, you know, I made a decision about, right? So now, like, let's fast forward up to YA. Let's go to a novel. It took me 8 years to write The Grave Sabers because I didn't know if I could write a novel. And what I discovered, and it wasn't everyday writing, but what I discovered is that I still wanted to write for the ear, even though it was a novel. Okay, that's fine. It makes beautiful word sounds on the page, but you have to move that character from point A to point B. You have to have dialogue that crackles. You have to have some narration. So all of a sudden it was like, I can't write a book unless it's a verse novel, which I'd like to do someday. I can't write a novel with the same kind of attention to every line on the page and word on the page as I can with a picture book for children who's a 2-year-old, or so I thought. But in the end, that's exactly what I did. So I didn't write for the ear as much, but I couldn't ignore that I hear the clash and clang of every word because I hear words as music. So the poet part of my brain has to be a little bit dulled in order to write a novel. So, and again, that's a guideline for me. It's like, Sheree, remember, you're writing a novel now. It's for an older child. They're not going to have as much patience if you go higgledy-piggledy all over the page. So I have to set that guideline. There's a narrative arc. Something needs to be revealed. What's at stake? Are there obstacles? Have you solved it? Do we care about the character? All of the things that you care about in what you think makes a good book. Interest. I don't want pages of description. pages and pages and pages. If I, as an adult writer, I can admire writers like that, but if I'm bored, I'm going to skip pages. I don't want somebody skipping pages in my book. I don't want that. At the same time, I'm so in love with language, it's really hard to let go of that part. For adults, when I decided to write a novel for adults, I just want to have fun. And that was very much my guideline. It was like, I don't want to win the Giller. I don't want to do a sober series. At this point in my life, I need to write the story I need to write. And if it makes a few of my friends laugh, that's good. I'd love it to be nominated for the Stephen Leacock Award, because that's really what I'd like, and it did, right? So I'm thinking, good. I don't look on Goodreads to see what people think of Kiss the Joys That Flies, because it's not as good as I would have liked it to be, right? It's like, and then you think, you can't write to please other people. You can't write for awards. You can't write. In the end, you have to write because there's nothing else you can do until you've written that story out of you. Mercy Beth Banjo had to come flying out of me when she did at that point in my life. I'm really glad she did. And when I hear from people, and I do, I just picked up this book. I didn't know you wrote for adults, and I get the really good feedback. That's the stuff I hang on to. So I am aware of audience. For two reasons. It's like a book doesn't exist if it's not read. Creating art for the sake of art is a beautiful thing to do. But for me, it has its life when somebody opens up the book and they read it. So I am conscious of creating beautiful as I can music on the page for young children, for having a story and a character that's going to grip a younger reader and take them along a journey that's called a plot. And then for an older audience, again, I'm still trying to discover what it is. I think my next book, I have no idea. I think it'll be short stories. So there are guidelines, which is you give this in Jake, in Pluto's Ghost, for example. I should be careful here, but Jake in his character might have, sworn every second word. I didn't want to put that into a book for late teens. So I found the best way I could wrestle with, I know Jake would use the other word, so I'm going to have him writing an essay in which he has to watch his language, and that way I can be authentic to his character and still not have to use the word I think Jake would use the whole time. Do you get what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. So I think, and when I finally figured that out, I'm like, Jake's not real, because I know how he'd be talking. I'm like, he's writing an essay. He's telling a story, and he knows that Shep's going to read it, so he's trying to be respectful. And he bleeps out of that every once in a while, and you even see him watching himself. You're watching his language, watching how not to say ain't, watching his grammar. And that's the only way I could find the truth of that character and not betray myself, which is, I don't want to write a book that every second word is the F word. I just don't. So because there's, like I said, there's too many beautiful words in the English language than to have to do that. So, so that was my way out of that, which is probably why I won't ever write a character like a Jake again, because I can only use that once. You can only get away with that once, right? So yeah. So guidelines are there. They're internal, but they're the internal ones of like, what do I think makes excellence? Can I give everything I can give to this story? But do I compare with the outside standards there? No, because that would make you crazy, because nothing would ever be good enough, ever good enough.